once again talking to you from my back porch on the island of Maui in Hawaii. Today's newsletter is titled, Babies Know Best. Babies know best. And indeed, the babies do know best. See, the babies know how to learn English or any language much better than we do as adults. Why? Because they learn language naturally, intuitively, and unconsciously. See, there's a huge problem out there. There are a lot of confused English students and confused English learners. Perhaps you are one. And these students know a lot of English. They know a lot of grammar rules. The problem is they can't understand instantly and effortlessly. They can't speak clearly, confidently, and effortlessly. They know about English linguistics, the academic study of linguistics, nouns and verbs and pronouns and phrases and clauses and different verb tenses and all of that stuff, but they can't perform. Can't understand instantly and effortlessly, can't speak clearly, confidently, and effortlessly. That's a huge problem. All these adult students out there who just can't actually speak English well and understand it well, even though they know a lot. See, most schools, most programs, and indeed most students in those schools are focused on academic English. See, academic English is the English that is used in schools, colleges, and universities at the highest level. It's academic English. So what are they focusing on? They're focusing on grammar rules. In other words, they are focusing on linguistics, and they're focused on writing. Right? If you think about it, in your English classes in the past, you probably did a lot of writing. You're reading lots of textbooks, and you're writing. For your tests, you're writing, lots of writing. And not just normal writing, not writing a letter, not writing an email to someone, but actually writing papers, writing essays, things like that. Academic English. Getting ready for the TOEFL exam or the IELTS, things like that. Well, that's academic level English. That is a very difficult kind of English. That is basically a formal, written style of English. And it's not even just formal and written, it's also very specific to schools. So academic English, the English you have learned most of your life probably, is a very small section of normal English. It's a special kind of English that is very formal, that is based on writing, and is used only in schools. And trying to learn that first, focusing on that first, is like trying to run a marathon, 30K or 50K, before you can crawl like a baby. It's backwards, in other words. In schools, in textbooks, in most English programs, the order is wrong. See, babies know better. Babies know best. How do babies learn English? Let's think about this. What do they do first? Let's talk about the steps. What are the steps? What's the schedule that a baby follows? Well, first, a baby focuses totally on listening. Naturally. Right? When they're first born, they can't speak, they can't read, they can't write, but they listen. And for at least a year, they are only listening. They're not speaking at all. They might make some sounds, blah, 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 but they're not speaking words. They're not speaking English, for example, if they're an American baby. What are they doing? They're totally focused on listening. Massive listening. Every day, constantly, they are listening to their parents. If they have brothers and sisters, they're listening to them. Listening. So much listening, constantly, all day, every day. Massive listening is the very first thing they do. They focus totally on that in the beginning for at least a year. But of course, that massive amount of listening continues their whole life. I mean, even now, I'm in my 40s, but I'm still listening to English constantly every day. Hours and hours and hours I listen to English. Every time I watch a TV program or a movie, or every time I have a conversation, I am listening. Every time I have a phone call, so much listening. So, step 1, babies focus totally and completely on listening. Lots and lots of listening. Now, after a lot of listening, what's the second thing they do? Do they start reading and writing? No, they don't. The second thing they focus on or practice is speaking. Of course, they continue listening a lot. They're still listening a lot every single day, but then after a year or more or less, they start speaking. And how do they practice speaking? Well, the most important point here is that it's unforced. They don't force themselves to speak. They don't try to speak full sentences if that's too difficult. No, they start by speaking one word. And then eventually they'll start speaking 2 words together. And then little phrases of 3 or 4 words. And then finally, after many months, they'll start to speak in full sentences. You may hear in the background some rain. I'm on my back porch in Hawaii, and it's starting to rain, so enjoy the sounds of Hawaiian rain as you listen to this. Okay, so back to babies know best. So first, the very first step, babies focus on listening. That's all they do. Then they add speaking, but they are still doing a lot of listening. What's the next step? Well, the next step is reading. But how do babies start learning to read? Well, they start learning to read when their parents read to them, right? They have some simple storybooks, and one of their parents will sit down with the child and read the book to them. So in other words, the baby is really, or the child, is really still listening. The child is looking at the book, looking at the words, but listening to their parent. So they start learning to read with listening. After some time of doing this, they'll begin to recognize some of the words, the sounds. Their parents will also teach them, A, B, C, D, teach them the different letters and some of those sounds as well. Again, how are they doing this? Through listening, right? They learn the sounds of the letters, and then they learn a lot of the words by listening to their parents read them. Finally, they'll move on to reading themselves without the parents. But they'll do a lot of deep learning with this. What does that mean? It means children will read the same book again and again and again. If you know any small children, you know they love to read their favorite books. They will read some books 100 times, 200 times, 300 times, or more. Right? The parents think, oh my God, I can't believe they want to listen to the same book again, to read the same book again. But they love it and they'll do it. So they're getting a lot of repetition, a lot of deep learning with that reading. And only at the final step will they read silently to themselves. That's the last step of learning to read for a small child. And of course, what do children read when they're young? Are they reading textbooks? No, of course not. They're reading stories. Stories about magic, stories about, wizards and princesses and all these kind of things, right? These great, funny, interesting, magical stories that are very interesting to them. And then they'll continue reading those, and of course, the storybooks will get more difficult. They're still focused a lot on reading stories. And only at the end, finally, the last step is writing. Only after they can read, at least some will they start to learn to write. But again, in the beginning, they are really only learning the physical part of writing. Right? For a young child, just to make the letters, to draw the letters, can be difficult. So for the first several years, they're just practicing making letters and writing individual words. As an adult, you don't need to do this. You can already do that, so it's not necessary. The point is that true writing, real writing, writing full sentences, writing ideas, that kind of thing, that happens much, much, much later. That kind of writing, real writing, it only starts after the child has totally mastered listening, totally mastered speaking, and is very, very good at reading. Only then will they begin to write, and it's very simple for a long, long time. The academic style of writing, writing essays and reports, that only begins much later. And learning written grammar rules, that's only in high school. That's at the age of 15 or 16. Even then, most students forget it. Most native speakers, for example, in the United States. I learned some grammar rules in high school, but these rules were only for academic English, only for school writing. But even when I learned those rules, I quickly forgot them because they were too confusing and boring and they didn't help me. I learned to write mostly from lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of reading. I was constantly reading novels and stories. And of course, when I was younger, I was reading simpler storybooks. And of course, before that, I was listening, and speaking. So, what does this mean for you right now? Well, right now, you want to speak English clearly, confidently, effortlessly, automatically. You want to understand spoken English instantly and effortlessly. That means you need to look at how the babies do it. See, the problem is in school, you focus too much on writing. You focus too much on difficult academic reading. You've learned this strange kind of English called academic English. And that strange academic English is only useful in schools. It's not useful in business. It's not useful with friends. It's not useful with travel. It's not useful for phone calls, emails, nothing else in the rest of the world. No other parts of the world use academic English, only schools. So you need to go back and be a baby again. Time to be a little baby again. Yay! You need to do what the babies did. And that means, number one, focus on listening. Maybe, this is your decision, but maybe you might spend 1 full year totally focused on listening. Massive listening. Just listening to English every single day. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And that's all. No worry about speaking, no worry about reading and writing, just tons and tons of listening. You could do that. You might decide to focus on listening and still continue speaking also. That's okay. It's okay. But the main point is you need to go back and do each of the steps in the correct order. So you need to first master listening. Master listening. Even if you're still speaking and you're still reading some, that's okay. But your first focus should be on listening. And you should totally master it. You should be able to understand English instantly and automatically. Only then should you worry about speaking better. And the truth is, as your listening really becomes great, your speaking will begin to prove totally automatically and effortlessly. You could decide to practice a little bit of speaking for presentations, just so you sound more confident. But the main thing you should do is totally focus on listening. And after you have mastered listening and you speak quite easily, then you could focus on reading. And you could be reading lots of novels. lots of storybooks. And you can even do that at the same time. You could do that with listening. So you could read a book and listen to the audiobook at the same time, for example. Lots and lots and lots of reading and listening, reading and listening, reading and listening. And only after you master listening and speaking and reading, only then should you worry about writing. And the good news is, when you master listening and speaking and reading, writing becomes so much easier. You don't need to think about grammar rules anymore. You can write more naturally. So, my message to you is this. Learn like a baby. Focus a lot on listening. That's the most. Focus mostly on listening. With speaking, don't force yourself to speak. It's okay to speak, to answer with 2 words or a little phrase. You don't have to use full sentences all the time. Just speak spontaneously. Let it come out. If you make mistakes, that's okay. Children don't worry about mistakes when they speak. Just speak naturally. And then third, read lots of storybooks. Interesting, fun storybooks. And the last point is, writing is the last thing to do. Save it for later.